Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Science and Spirituality Talks. I'm here today with Dr. Kara Fitzgerald. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Kara. She has been doing a lot of things over these years. Definitely, I'm sure you've had your eye on some of the research that she's been putting out. She has been a forerunner in epigenetics and longevity. She has both research and a clinical practice. So what I really appreciate about Kara is the fact that she can straddle both aspects of science and then bringing that over into clinical application. She's also written a best-selling book called Younger You: How to Reduce Your Bio Age and Live Longer and Better. I know Kara because she and I are both educators for the Institute for Functional Medicine. She teaches for a different module. She teaches for the immune module. She lectures globally, and she also has her own podcast called New Frontiers in Functional Medicine. But we're going to get into a little bit of a different space today, getting into the deeper aspects of Kara and getting to know her a little bit better. So welcome. Woohoo is right. Well, let's see where we go down this
Yeah, let's
rabbit
see where we
hole of
go.
getting to know you. And I'm
Yeah,
curious as well because,
yeah,
I know you,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
don't know you. And for
Right,
everybody on here, I'm
right.
learning much more about their life and it's teaching
That's
me
cool.
things.
Well, and as I said to you off recording, yeah, it's people like your podcast. I mean, like our colleagues have commented to me. Wow,
Yeah.
nice podcast.
Well,
So
it's
anyway,
it's
kudos.
your turn. You we get to know a little bit about you, but we're going to start with the science. So, I would say walk us back in the past and kind of give us a little bit of an inkling as to how you got into naturopathic medicine, how you were drawn to science, and also the research that you're doing today. Go back as far as you want. You could start from the age of 7. I've had all different kinds of responses to this question. So go
In
wherever
the
you
Wayback
feel.
Bus, I feel like I had a pretty cool foundation in that my mom, and I think maybe we've talked about this before, you and I, but like my mom raised us aware of what we were eating, the environment. Like I was raised with a kind of a painful awareness of eating good food. It's funny, right? It's painful. I say that really kind of joking, but I did have some trauma around eating healthy. Like the only kid in school with like sardines and homemade like super dense crazy bread. Like I cleared a cafeteria table because of my sardines. I mean, there's a little trauma in that, right? But
Aw.
I mean, I say that just with a lot of a lot of appreciation. The reality is, because my mom is wildly healthy. I mean, she's this incredible example of living, walking this walk and extending that information to us despite, for a massive chunk of time being a single mom. We didn't have a lot of money. We had government food. We went to the soup kitchen. I mean, we seriously had some humble beginnings. And she raised us to be curious. She raised us with an awareness of sophisticated foods. She plied us with brewer's yeast, like sort of like I think probably the trendy nutrients of the time, brewer's yeast, vitamin C, they still are. And then she raised us with a lot of curiosity. Like curiosity was fostered into our existence. And I mean, I remember just off the top of my head, the thing that comes to mind with that question is that she would never tell me the definition of a word. I was super curious, and she would stoke that by telling me to look it up, and I'd be really mad at her because I would be like, "Mom, I know you know it. I know you know it." But I was so curious, I would just have to look it up. And she said to me many, many years later that would prompt a dialogue between, with the etymology and then the multiple meanings and then the words above and the words below, and it would just turn into this thing. And I think she created a natural foundation for where I ended up. I mean, there's just no doubt about it where it came from. My mom was a nurse, and um, later when she was in her 40s, so we were older, she went back to school. She moved to New Haven, went to Yale, got her APRN, became a psychiatric nurse practitioner, studied at the Jungian Institute. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Badass. And just I know. I know.
Sounds like a
And
cool
just
mom.
yeah, and I'm proud of her today because she's strong, she's super vital. She's actually announced her retirement whenever that was, and then said, "Now I'm a potter." And that's what
The
she's
Potter.
doing. And I mean, and she had always had that artistic element, but she brought that back in, and that's what she does. So and sometimes she puts her stuff in shows. I mean, her pottery is gorgeous. I don't know that I have anything.
I think I see one right behind you. Up on the hill.
This is not, that's from a conference I did. They gave me that as a gift. I will I have some I have a piece in my office in Connecticut, but yeah, her work is really pretty cool. Anyway, I mean, just that, her presence, her thinking, her curiosity, like all of that, the space to foster ours, the insistence that we fostered ours, going to museums. I got that from her. And then on my dad's side, my dad was an engineer. My dad was a pilot. He taught us how to fly planes. He had like, it was definitely sort of right brain, left brain, but also fused between the both. And, just really different experiences. But with both of them, a, uh, a commitment to kind of being smart, being thinking kids, sort of, um, kind of living bigger. I took off my first airplane. Uh, when I was 9. I mean, I had my own logbook when, believe it or not. I mean, we all learned how to fly.
Oh,
We all learned.
wow.
Yeah, he was an instructor. So I think that my childhood kind of created the potential for me to discover science. I didn't it took me a while. My mom was also a musician, and she's classically trained violinist. We all ended up becoming musicians. I was a musician through my teen years, and through my teen years, yeah, actually maybe into early 20s. I was a bass guitar player, and I almost went to music school. I was accepted into music school. So talk about like a different direction, but yeah, I was a musician in my younger years, and we wrote our own material, and we toured, and all sorts of kind of fun stuff. So I you know, I think probably that creative thinking, that sort of energy of my childhood informed who I became, and kind of being able to think out of the box relatively without discomfort. You know? I mean, this is jumping way ahead, but my mentor, Richard Lord, and we'll get to that at the laboratory, he always told us to embrace the uncertainty. And sitting in that place of definitions coming from, very out of the box or unexpected locations was something that just or is something that, I can be with.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little bit of my background. But you probably want to know when I got into.
Well, gosh, this is all so interesting. I didn't know any of those things. And
I
your
know.
mom and my mom must have been sisters from another
I
mother or
think I
something.
know, I know. I think we've
Something.
we've like touched upon this a little bit in our various communications
Yeah.
because I knew that about your mom.
Let me just go back again. Like, so you grew up in Connecticut,
Connecticut, yeah. I was born in Cleveland, and but moved to Connecticut when I was young, when I was 7.
and how many siblings?
I have 3, so 2 brothers and a sister.
And where are you in the birth order? Just so I can orient myself in your family
Middle
dynamic.
low. Middle
Middle
low.
low. Okay. Okay. All right. Got it. So, somehow I can see you kind of rocking out as a bass guitarist, though. That is within my scope of thinking, and
That's
I can
awesome.
project out a little bit. I think that'd be kind of cool. What about so with your mom being a nurse, being artistic, and really curious? like you, I'm kind of wondering about the spiritual framework of your household. I think you said to me long ago that your mom is Polish.
No, my dad is.
Your
My
dad is
dad is.
Polish.
Yeah,
Okay, I was looking at your last name and just assuming that it was your mom and not your
Irish.
dad.
Yeah,
Right. And so I'm just kind of curious when I think of the Irish, Polish, I start to think, what did she grow up Catholic? Did you
big
have any
time.
kind of spiritual framework? I don't know.
Big time Catholic with Irish and Polish, or you can't escape
That's what I would think. But
Catholicism. Yeah, we grew up Catholic for sure. I went to Catholic school when I was really young. Um, in Lakewood, Ohio. Super I grew up I was in an Irish Catholic neighborhood. My dad's family lived in the Slavic village section of Cleveland. So all my Polish family were there until they all migrated out to the suburbs as they, became successful with their like delicate Polish delicatessens and stuff like that. And my grandpa had a hardware store, and yeah, like pierogies were a huge
Roga's
factor in my early
kolache.
childhood. Yeah, all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so definitely both sides Catholic. Yeah, I went to a lot of church when I was young, but then my parents got divorced, and took that prompted a reevaluation of the strict interpretation of Catholicism. So, when we moved to Connecticut slowly over time, it was less about being Catholic and more, my mom just went through a phase of just being spiritual about a lot of stuff. And it was maybe sometimes it was successful. Only the memory that's coming to mind, which is super duper funny. I'm going to have to, maybe I'll tell her to listen to this. But, like, she went through a Native American phase, and she's like, I remember getting my period, early on, and her telling me to go sit under the tree in the moss, I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Whatever, mom,
Love that.
whatever." You know, go sit
She
and
was
have her
ahead of her
wade
time.
into the moss. But I was a punk rocker, and I was just like, "Ma, like, whatever." I was so I was like, well, I wasn't 16. I got my period before that, but I just remember just being absolutely mortified at the suggestion. And it's hysterical to think back on it, you know. But yeah, that's what she said. I don't know, maybe it was a full moon.
Well,
But
that is
this
a
was
native tradition.
yeah.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, but so it
You're
sounds like
gonna have to introduce that idea in a little younger, though. Like, when your kid's
yes.
already established into, like, complete alternative with a biker like, you might have passed that window.
Yeah, it sounds like it. She tried at least.
She
But it
tried.
but it sounds like, so she's still living? She's still in, okay, and are you close to her, and do you see her in a different light now that you've had this experience, kind of like with a mom that was so cutting edge in so many ways?
I mean, without question, a consistent I mean, sh how she raised us. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, definitely, let me say, going through a divorce, not having money, going through being, just and being somewhat impoverished. Although we were in a world where we weren't different, we were kind of in an environment where a lot of people were struggling. So it wasn't like we stuck out in any capacity. But um, I no, I get that what I learned, those pivotal pieces, as disparate as they seem in some ways, from my dad and from my mom. I mean, there's no doubt that they have informed who I am today. There's just no doubt in my mind. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's to be able to design, to be able to actually think like and design a research study around epigenetics, and that's a massive flash forward. But just to have the capacity, like in our clinic, in the clinic setting that we built, the team, like just this environment where we all get to participate in thinking, we can think outside of the box, we work together. I think there are certain elements in the community and what we've been able to accomplish in our community, in our clinic, as in our platform um, that are special and are sourced to having a certain level of freedom. Having actually a pretty large level of freedom when I was a kid, and in fact, maybe too much. Another thought that just popped into my head was buying alcohol when I was way too young to do so, and because there was a package store across the street, a liquor store from our apartment, and my mom going over there. I remember when my mom went in and she told the guy, she's like, "Stop selling to my daughter. She's 14." She yelled at him. Oh, that's so funny. But
We need
yeah,
your
she
mom
yelled.
on this podcast. We need
Isn't
to
that
hear her
funny?
side of the
She
story.
just went in there and opened a can of whoop ass on that guy, and he never sold he never sold anything to us again. Not hysterical. Anyway, that we had there was a certain level of freedom of thought, of, of awareness and all of that, sure, absolutely influenced who I am. Yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering too, with your thinking on epigenetics, how much of that is actually genetically primed? The fact that your mother was a nurse, your dad a pilot, an engineer,
Yeah.
kind of having that structure,
Yeah.
healing. Did that just transfer into you? I always wrestle with that question of nature versus nurture. And you have a daughter, so you're actually going to see what happens there with nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my daughter is adopted,
Right.
and I mean, right. I mean, I guess that's the nature versus nurture also. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, Deanna. For me and for my daughter, um, yeah, I mean, well, and I mean, as we move deeper into understanding epigenetics, nature is nature and nurture is nurture. Like, you inherit you inherit the nurturing as well. It's kind of crazy. You
Mhm,
inherit
mhm.
epigenetic patterns. You inherit that information into your genome. I think the lines are blurry. Um, nature versus nurture. It's like I mean, they've always been blurry, but perhaps they're even more now, knowing that we can inherit, and we do inherit the nurture. We inherit
That's
nurture,
true.
we can inherit the trauma, we can inherit all of that. Like, I think about, the inheritance patterns of my dad's family coming from Poland, and, they came because of a hardship, right? So that information exists in my genome. And, my mom's family also, they came from Ireland mostly. Same kind of information in, they didn't people don't come to the United States because things were super easy, right? For all of us. Some people, I mean, obviously there's a continuum. I wrote about this, I touched upon this in the book, just, thinking about slavery, thinking about, well, Native Americans were here, and then their experience. But those of us who migrated here, certainly we didn't do it because our lives were cushy, and so there is that awareness in our epigenomes.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it like? Stress? You mentioned slavery, the stress, poverty, famine, like everything that are.
Changes to the dietary pattern,
Yeah.
yeah, huge, like going from, a traditional Native American diet to, like, here's your pound of flour or whatever, and your bag of sugar. I mean, and just meteoric, just the development of diabetes, from where there wasn't. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. So let's move forward in your timeline a bit. I feel like I'm taking you through a timeline for everybody here. So let's move into your past your teens. What did you decide to study in college? Did you go right into biology and medicine, or where did you land there?
No, it's a little bit of a circuitous route. I mean, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Um, a friend of mine, an influential friend of mine, suggested that I wanted to be a social worker. You want to be you'd make a good social worker, Kara. And I said okay to that, until I actually and I did all of my electives and had a blast doing all my electives. And then I got into my social work classes and it was pretty clear that it actually wasn't what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know and I didn't know. And so I just sort of went for it. I actually stopped. I left school for a chunk because I just because it just wasn't right. I got through my electives, had a blast, and then when I actually got into to training in social work, it just didn't resonate with me. Let me think what happened in my journey. Um, I ended up y- so I had at some point in time, I got through undergrad with a degree in English because back then that's what you did when you didn't know what you were going to do with a focus in the classics. And I remember. So I ended up still just, having some unanswered questions, just not and taking one of my final classes in school was in Buddhism actually. And that whole experience, and there's kind of a backstory, interesting backstory to that of I had a spiritual experience, believe it or not. I had a spiritual experience at a young age. I had a momentary awareness that I didn't call it a spiritual experience. It's only in hindsight that I gave it that label. I called it higher thought. So I had an awareness at incredibly young age. Maybe I was 19, maybe I was 20, that we weren't using our entire brains, that we were just sort of living in this really small place within our brains. And I had this moment of feeling like I was thinking from my entire, in using my entire brain. I called it higher thought. I kept a journal back then, and that's what I wrote. I was like, I had this awareness of higher thought,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
could see an interconnection in the universe. And I mean, it was really kind of it was a pivotal it was a really pivotal experience for me at such a young age. But it ended up, even as I stumbled along and with who am I and what am I going to do, and so I had the spiritual experience and it was incredible. I remember feeling like I shared it with a handful of people, what had happened. People were pretty incredulous, and I remember after a time in my life, I just kinda stopped talking about it. It really, even though it wildly informed my existence. So, ultimately, after doing, getting my first degree, I had this course in Buddhism, and it was an effort to kind of understand what this experience was, and, and ended up moving into a Zen center. So we did a meditation practice together. We went to a Korean Zen center, and I was like, when in doubt, move into a Zen center. So in my 20s, I lived sitting in the unknown of who am I and what am I gonna do? Like those times of really big questions. I meditated. I moved into a Zen center and did a ton of meditation. Um, I think it's interesting. I think sometimes when we're in our 20s, like when I went to medical school, when I went to naturopathic medical school, a lot of my friends were finding spirituality at that age, whereas I was finding science. It was like flip-flop because I
Flip flop.
had
Mhm.
really done
Mhm.
this. I had
Mhm.
spent quite a bit of time in meditation. And so um, during that period, I became aware of the fact that I wanted to go to grad school, and I began to sit with what would that look like? Would it be psychology? Would it be medicine? I wasn't sure. The way that I ended up making the decision was, um, I left the Zen center and I started to work in a health food store. My very first job, by the way, was in a co-op because we got food from the co-op when I was a kid and, you could get your discount if you donated your hours, so my mom would give me, like, an allowance to do it, so I was familiar with that health food store environment. So I got a job there. I worked in the supplement section, and it was in and this is when I was toying with who am I or what will grad school look like for me. And I ended up really falling in love with nutraceuticals and particularly the mechanisms of nutraceuticals. So this was really, I think, when I in my 20s when I found biochemistry, and found just a wild passion for it. In fact, you know Udo Erasmus, Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, of course, right? A real
Yeah.
seminal work on, fatty acids. That book, I remember that book kept me up at night, kept me up. It was so eicosanoid biochemistry was so exciting. I was
I'm
just
gonna
like,
quote you
"Really?
on that.
Eicosanoid biochemistry?" It was so ridiculously exciting. It's funny because the our manager in that section, who's still one of my best girlfriends many, many years later, just it was such a funny hoot for her to I would come in, I would be like, "Susanna, did you know that, 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 that?" And I would just give her all this science. And when we would have customers, they would just be like inundated with having to hear about, the mechanisms as I was understanding them. And she would sometimes have to rescue people. And because I had this sort of like, she'd have to like extricate me from kind of overwhelming people. And I came from such a different background. Like my language was not always pristine, and it would be peppered with four-letter words, and she would like manage that as well. But it was it was amazing. So this was still in my 20s, but it was then that I began to realize that actually layer into that getting chronic fatigue. So I got
Mm.
Epstein-Barr at that time, and I
Oh,
was
okay.
treated yeah, I had pretty profound fatigue. Um, and I think in part, this is ironic, but I think in part it had to do with hardcore meditation, with really truncated sleep and a full-time job. Yeah, yes. I mean, yeah, I was
How much were
really
you meditating on average?
um I mean, we would be up in the Zen center, we would just get up really
Early.
early and start early, and I was young, so I would stay up late, and then I would get up and work a full-time job. I worked in a restaurant, and then I was doing, like, GRE stuff. I was doing other stuff as well, so I had a lot going on, and then we would do retreats, and the retreats were I tried to meditate, like, 3 weeks per, winter in the winter, if I could do that. If I did that for a couple of years. And then we had monthly weekend retreats that would be, super early morning until late. By design, they didn't we weren't sleeping a lot in that structure so that you would sit in meditation.
Kara, I
Um,
just have 2 questions for you, that are just percolating on up, and I just feel like this is the time to answer before we move on to your medical school training. So, you grew up Catholic, but then you had this higher thought experience, and you pivoted over to going to a Zen center. How did you and you said that you took a course on Buddhism to try to understand it. So, how did you make that transition? Like, just talk about that tender transition of being raised with one way of thinking about your spiritual views and then
yeah,
moving over to this other one. And was that easy to do, or did you feel like
yeah.
Catholicism couldn't answer it for you and that's why you pivoted over?
Well, we had already transitioned, I think, as a family when, um when my mom and dad got divorced, because that was such a big disruption coming from a pretty strict Catholic background, like, there was a reconciliation that had to happen. Like, if you're going to sort of forgive that experience, you have to look beyond that conservative structure that existed in our world. I know that it's not necessarily quite as strict in others. So um we were already starting. I say we because I really felt like this was a family. I mean, I remember having a kind of a kitchen table dialogue about, what we thought about Catholicism and, eventually kind of putting down the weekly practice of going to church. Although I have to say that it certainly has come back for me. And I live in a very Catholic country and I have such an appreciation for it. Like I really do. An extremely pivotal book for me was in the Zen Center. My mom gave me this book called The Feminine Face of God. And it's about, it's about Jesus. It's been such a long time. It's been a long time. I can see the cover. It really moved me. I think it's like about biblical teachings. Somebody else knows a lot better than I do. I know there are people listening to this podcast right now, like, yeah, it's blah, 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 blah." But it was one of those books that just brought a deep. It's a really beautiful book. I think a lot of it is. Oh, and it's written by two women. It's pulling these really juicy, beautiful quotes from the Bible, very deep, super resonant quotes. And one of them, at least one of them, maybe both of them were Buddhists also. And in Buddhism, there's no you don't give up your religion of origin. Like there's no ask in Buddhism to change and to subscribe to a structure of belief. So people from all different religions come and honor and celebrate whatever their birth religion is, or whatever they may still be practicing, and they can engage in the Zen. I was in Buddhism specifically. So in Zen, there's no ask um, to buy into a dogma or a doctrine or anything. It's a practice. So there was never any conflict. And I think just my mom giving me that book because I was in the Zen Center, man, it was just, I know it was pivotal for her, but that just, it just really felt, um, like it fulfilled, it fit into those years for me and that experience. And, was very meaningful for me. So I had a really rich spiritual life as a young individual. And it was different. It came, I developed it unfolded in front of me, and it was informed by my childhood. Um, but by my experience, by, all of those things.
It also sounded like it came up, like, when you had this more spiritual awakening, like, the crux of it was coming through when you figured out that social work was not something that you wanted to do. It was kinda like a what I'm hearing is, like, it was like a break point. It was like, "Oh, wait a minute, what do I wanna do?" So then pulling out of that, giving yourself some time, and
Yes.
then was the spiritual awakening kind of a long drawn out thing, or was it kind of like
No.
you had an evening where it was like, "Oh my gosh,"
Yes.
it was
Yeah,
more
and that
acute?
predated yeah, that predated Zen. I mean, that ultimately is what prompted me to get into Zen Buddhism, and I practiced for a little while something called A Course in Miracles too. It was like I went through a period of just like as I was searching for, um, meaning for that experience, and kind of how to be with it and incorporate it. Course in Miracles played a role. It's funny, I think of, I did a lot of I took a lot of philosophy, existentialism, um, logotherapy, man's search for meaning. Like there were things like that in my 20s. It was really filled with that. And it culminated in my experience in the Zen Center, ultimately doing too much at once. And which is ironic, right? People don't think one could develop chronic fatigue meditating. I
That
meditated like
is a whole
like I
new
started to, like when I became a competitive cyclist, I think I probably approached meditate. No, not exactly, I needed to pull back. Like I was ready to leave. I had been close to 2 years there, and I was ready to move on. It's funny. I have this memory right now of somebody just like being, you know, somebody saying to me kind of like, "Wow, I can't think," and hearing about my meditation experience, "I can't think of a bigger waste of time, Kara." Someone said that to me, I remember, and it made me laugh so hard when he said that because I'm like, "Gosh, I can't think of a better use of my time. I can't think of a better use of my time than getting to do this. And um, one of the really cool things about Zen Buddhism is that when you do a meditation, everybody there thanks you because when one person gets enlightened, we're all enlightened. So your enlightenment is my enlightenment. When you go on a retreat and you're sitting, your clear mind becomes my clear mind. And so when you do those kinds of things, everyone thanks you. And in the original, in the Korean tradition that I came from, you get gifts. People supply you with food. People come with, big bags of rice and just, they make dishes, lots of kimchi, lots of fermented foods factored into my early years, buried in our backyard. um, and it was just, and you do service. Like I was kitchen master, they called, like I was in charge of cooking for a while. Like we would all have our own areas that we would be in charge of. And it was the other thing was that was amazing about it was that it was just an awesome community. And we weren't isolated. We were right in the middle of New Haven, Connecticut. We're actually part of Yale. This was part of Yale. So we were right in the middle of the city. It wasn't an isolated setting. We would go to the Zen Center in Rhode Island, which was more rural, but we were right in the middle, and there was a weekly meditation and the Yale Chapel. In fact, our head Zen master, or the one of the heads in our school, in our there in New Haven, um, actually everybody was involved in Yale in one form or another, but he toggled between both worlds a lot. But it was just this really vibrant, awesome community to be a part of. It was just a fabulous community. Um, but it was time for me to go. It was time for me to go. I knew it was a stop on my journey. And for a period of time I was in this health food store, which really that combined with becoming unwell,
Mm.
going to a lot of doctors, so having that story that so many of us have, not getting better by conventional means. And it was my landlady who was in her she was like a spitfire in her 90s, said, "You need to go to my doctor." And her doctor happened to be a naturopathic physician who was like one of the first NGs in our state, or one of the most early licensed. I mean, he's still alive, so it wasn't that long, and it wasn't that long ago. But I don't know how old he is. It is getting to be long ago because I was in my 20s. Now I'm in my 50s. But anyway, I went to see him. He prescribed a botanical combination. He gave me some CoQ10. He gave me some super basic, gentle dietary advice. He didn't strong arm me at all into it. Just, eat a little bit more veg, Kara, just some basic stuff. Um, Something simple that I could do as a young person. He was able to kind of meet me where I was at, and I got better. I got better. I got
So,
better. I just
okay.
got better.
Yeah.
And and that combined with my background, combined with being in the health food store, I think as I explored schools, going to naturopathic medical school just seemed just unequivocally the appropriate fit. It really did. Um
What did your parents think?
I think that they I think I think people were somewhat they it w I mean, it was so surprising. I mean, I think people were really quite surprised. I don't know what folks imagined I would end up doing, but, I had discovered without question a deep, deep, deep passion for biochemistry, for nutritional biochemistry. It's funny, because of my medical experience, because of my experience of a classic condition that is non-responsive to, conventional intervention, I went to naturopathic medical school. I I mean, I could see my like, it's int I like, I if the prism was turned ever so slightly, I'm sure that I could have been in a PhD program. I remember,
Yeah.
like I
Mhm.
remember being in naturopathic school, aware. It's so crazy, like aware that um I'm not going to go into practice as a full-time clinician. Like clinical medicine, I was I was interested in, of course, but it was the mechanism. And that only grew. That only grew. I was in the Pacific Northwest. Jeff was lecturing, um, Christy, Carol McMakin. I mean, I was just seeing these really badass people, but especially I was wowed by Jeff's lectures. I was wowed by our nutritional biochemistry, or not nutritional, our medical biochemistry lectures. All of this stuff was so interesting to me. And you want to know one of the reasons why. And so here I am in school, and a lot of my friends are there. They're discovering yoga, they're discovering meditation, and I became a competitive cyclist. I mean, I had been a cyclist all along, but I turned the volume up, and of course, cycling out in the Pacific Northwest is incredible, and there's all sorts of races going on. So I became a competitive cyclist while I was in school, which really helped with my thinking, which it really did, when I would be training out there. Um, and I dove into science. I just absolutely dove into science. And I remember my roommate, she's sinking into her spiritual self, and I'm in my science. And she was like, Kara, why? She's like, why? And I remember saying to her, this was a big deal for me. I was like, God is in the mechanism. That was my aha. And it stayed with me. It still is. And and it started at school. And then I ended up getting to be in a laboratory, which I absolutely needed to be. But it was like, the more I understood, the more I unpacked about the mechanism as I was learning in school, but then later when I was in reading research articles and so forth, and the more I understood physiology, biochemistry, etc., the more of the pieces of the puzzle were put together as new papers would come out. The more understanding we had around the interconnection of neurotransmitters and metabolism and the cofactors, the coenzymes, and the enzymes themselves, and just all of this. The more I got it, the more elegant it was, the more beyond, the greater it was than anything I would be able to design myself. That's was like this massive aha for me. Like the more you understand, the more you unpack science, the more elegant it is, the more poetic it is, the more, I don't know, like it's like the more balanced, the more, I mean, it's just extraordinary, and it's it's just absolutely beyond anything I would ever be able to do. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes, because it's like that for me, those experiences of piecing this together is, about being able to, as much as I can as a human, as a mere mortal, sort of touch on what God is. Isn't that
Girl,
wild?
I'm, like, having many goosebump moments over here. That's why I'm just holding space. I really love listening to this. I even wrote it down. God is in the mechanism. I mean, I think that's why scientists either become very religious or spiritual, or they go the other way. Like, it's very I have seen that in my career
Yes, of
anyway.
course. Like people want to be able to define it. And those people contribute extraordinary content to it. But there's something about sitting and allowing science to unfold before you and sort of receiving that information. So here I am studying naturopathic medicine, and I should have a clinical career. I was not the I mean, I was okay in clinical medicine, but I was thriving here. And, just by I wasn't sure what I would do when I graduated. I don't know that I wasn't a competitive. We have a finite amount of residencies, and I knew I needed postgraduate experience, and I didn't think that I would qualify. I wouldn't be able to get a residency, and I wasn't called to do full tilt clinical medicine. And so here I am sitting as I'm coming to the close of my education, which was so rich and incredible and amazing. I loved it, and I loved my extracurricular education, like, listening to Jeff and the people that we had access to in the Pacific Northwest, just as much as anything. Gosh, I was really into cell wall deficient bacteria back then, and seeing Lyda Matman, getting to be able to see her, and that's a whole side conversation. But I just had all these amazing educators. And there's so many great educators, in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
So many brilliant people having some degree of access to IFM. I mean, there was just so much possibility out there, so many opportunities. And I just took them all. I was very, very excited, and then, would process it all as I was like on my bike. um, but here I am coming to the close. What the heck am I going to do? And I wasn't going to apply for a residency. I was thinking and thinking and throwing out lines, and very, very strongly sitting with the idea of a PhD. Um, it's funny, we had a business education class, and I convinced my professor, I'm like, I'll never have a clinic practice. I just never will. Like, I don't need to do our final. And so we had this agreement that I could write up a research design. Like, he let me do something else. Of course, I've had a clinic practice for many, many years, but it was super funny. I was absolutely convinced that wouldn't be my path. But I got very, very sick. I had the flu, classic flu. I was stuck in my apartment on my little my little fold out. It was a very humble apartment, at least a little fold out couch. That, by the way, my apartment was later in that Sean Penn movie, Call of the Wild. It was like for 30
Really?
seconds, it was in that movie.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that funny? But I'm sitting on this, and I decided, I was like, "Here, I just look at the postgraduate opportunities, just look at the residencies." And thank God I did, because there was Metametrics Laboratory on there. Metametrics Laboratory was doing um, a residency. It was really a postdoc. And that was it. I just was that I was inspired to apply, so I did it. And that's when I moved to I got the position, amazingly enough. I remember my first my Richard Lord, who's a PhD, a very highly regarded PhD nutritional biochemist, and leader in the field, just extraordinary educator with an amazing background in the various labs that he's worked in. He interviewed me, and his obsession at that time was low homocysteine and its influence on glutathione, and we ended up writing a white paper together. I barely understood what he was talking about, but I was ridiculously excited. I was so freaking excited. That was my interview, just listening to him with my jaw on the floor. He ended up just being my deepest, dearest mentor, and I wanna say, and I learned so much, and I was a contributor, so we wrote white papers. I was a contributor to laboratory evaluations for integrative and functional medicine. Just it was the most. We had lab rounds. I mean, we just steeped in science, and I just got to learn. He was like my Zen master in science, and I just learned as at his feet. And we would have these long, long discussions. And I remember thinking, like, he would often, because he had to get me out of his office, he had to do some work. And so he would like send me off with a Zen koan. Like, he would give me a biochemistry question that was hard enough that I would just scanter off, and I would try to answer it, and he would get some peace. Like, what did he ask me? He had asked me about, what amino acid residue is at the catalytic center of the aconitase enzyme, and why. Now go. Go.
This
It's
kind
so
of sounds
funny.
like your mom telling you to go look up the word in the dictionary and you go down the path, right? Like there's kind of a pattern here of
Yeah.
exploration and curiosity.
He was super supportive, and he was also very challenging, and he pushed me. We had these lab rounds that were, basically, the equivalent of of that kind of environment in a PhD program where you have to defend yourself and you have to come forward with good papers and you better know, you better have your references and understand the mechanism. I mean, those were our rounds. They weren't obviously they were not clinical rounds. But they were so fun and you just had to be versed in the science in a depth way and ready to, provide your conclusions and your evidence and your papers and so forth. And it was super rich. But one of the coolest things he taught me, and this is full circle moment, was he was very spiritual, by the way. He was really spiritual. He was he's a Southern Baptist. He's still alive. He's a Southern Baptist. But he had the Boehringer Mannheim poster in we had a library at the laboratory, and there was the Boehringer Mannheim poster, and it was kind of lower to the ground, and there was, like, a little stool there, and he said to me, the Boehringer Mannheim pathway chart was, like, all known metabolism circa 1993 is when that pathway chart came out, but we were using it all the time. I mean, this was way before, any meaningful access to, in the form that we have today online, you really had to rely on your pathway charts. Um, but I remember him telling me, sit down in this little kind of bench thing. It was sort of like a Buddhist chair. And he goes, hold your eyes at half mast, stare at the Boehringer Mannheim chart, ask your question, ask your biochemical question, and hold your eyes and wait, and you will see what you need to see. That is how I
Really?
was
Oh
yeah,
my
that's
goodness.
how I was taught to read that chart, not go to, row 9's, uh, uh, see, row 9. I'm like, I'm losing it, just go down and over, um, the way that most people use the Boehringer Mannheim chart. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was like, "Just sit in there, ask your question, and allow." Allow. So whatever we were thinking about nitric oxide or methylation or transsulfuration or, you know, um
That's a beautiful synthesis. So really, again, like really connecting deeper to those pathways. Is he the person that led you down the path of exploring more with methylation?
yeah, that was a part of the lab because we were doing, we were looking at for sure. I mean, yes, from the get-go, because of course homocysteine is cornerstone
Yeah.
of the methylation cycle. So yeah, from the get-go, it was a fabric of my existence there. Um, but then let me see. So then I left the lab. I moved back home. Actually, I wrote the case studies in integrative and functional medicine, which was a kind of a lab textbook for how you
I
apply.
remember that book. Yeah, I still have a
Yeah.
copy somewhere. Yes.
Yeah. Um, and that was applying laboratory science and clinical practice. And I went back to Connecticut. I lived with my mom for a little while. Um, Let me think. It was around that time, authoring that book, that I ended up joining faculty at IFM. I joined a clinical practice when I was there. Um, the lab was sold. So, I mean, I was still kind of steeped in that world. Um, but but it was changing because, I wasn't there, and the loss of that community, of the laboratory community, was huge for me. And that was when I started journal club. That was when I started the journal club because I remember, like, doing basically I feel like I, just stalked David Hossie one day at his Imogen conference and sort of forced him to listen to me. Like, I'm like, "David, something's not right in my soul, and I don't know what it is." And I'm like talking and talking. I'm like, "Oh my God, we don't have lab rounds anymore. I'm not like with this group of like juicy humans who are just curious and want to explore." Like, I had lost that world moving from Atlanta. Um, and that's when I had the epiphany, like, we needed to start this journal club and just bring together all of us, because there was this extraordinary group of people, like, all of us, we were going to the IFM conference, like, there was this budding extraordinary group of, like, really deep thinkers, like the next generation. And, so we did journal club for a long time, and that, as you know, was so enriching and nourishing. And and I was able to kind of recreate that. So just understanding this really deep centric need for community. Um, my clinic is it's in person. We still have a brick and mortar in Connecticut, but also virtual. And, we still have 2 rounds a week, like way more rounds for, the amount of patients that we see just because, and we
Yeah.
keep each other current. I mean, I would always jokingly say, it takes a village to stay current in literature. Now you can use ChatGPT, but even still, you have to verify all of it. There's just like a whole new tool that one needs to use. But I just, I created or worked on creating a community there, and then a community for the platform, and, just keeping the curious minds, um, up and alive. And I think in all of that, um, I mean, I guess that epigenetics figures in during that early time, during Journal Club, and sort of building my practice and my platform. The world of epigenetics, that science was sort of coming towards us. And it's funny. I was, I was, um, I was interested in it, but I was always like, I was also a little bit like, you know, I've 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 got it over here. Like, I'm cool. I've got this community. We have this amazing journal club. I have a clinical practice. I'm speaking. I was at the IFM that time and at that time. And um I was a little resistant to really taking in the science on epigenetics, like ingesting it and incorporating it into my thinking. And it might be, it's possible that resistance comes from the fact that it would be so profoundly life-changing for me that maybe I was like, "No, I'm pretty happy how I am right now." But I finally dove into reading the papers, and then questions started to arise, like, the early science in epigenetics was mostly in cancer, and how cancer hijacks gene expression, and, does it through methylation. And I had this strong one of a primary way, not the only way, of course, is through manipulating gene expression vis-a-vis DNA methylation. And, the next question was, how are we doing this? Um, how are the interventions in functional medicine influencing? Could we be doing harm? Are we bettering this, and, uh, minimizing how aggressively cancer can take over? We had various questions coming up. um, and what else was in this? Just of course, we were talking a lot in our space back then about nutrigenomics, and, it was clear those of us practicing functional medicine knew that we had to be influencing gene expression. So that was a conversation in our space, but there wasn't the science there yet. Having a really smart team, of course, Romilly Hodges, who you sent to me. She's still my right-hand woman in many, many ways, but definitely in science. Um, she and I began to tussle with, if we were going to influence DNA methylation using a functional intervention, what would that look like? And
Mhm.
ultimately designing a diet and lifestyle intervention, bringing it into clinical practice, seeing, good response from the patients who we prescribed it to. Um, and then finally being able to research it, just being extraordinarily blessed with funding through BRAC and Metagenics to be able to
Yes.
actually research it in a clinical trial. We didn't at so we were convinced. I mean, I was just like, we have to be influencing gene expression. We absolutely have to be influencing DNA methylation with this intervention. I mean, I could see our intervention would drop homocysteine, it would change certain biomarkers, but cavalierly, I was like, even with the even with the scant to non-existent human data, I was absolutely convinced we had to be moving the needle there. biological age as a thing was not, I mean, at that time, we did not think that you could influence biological age.
Right.
Steve Horvath, who developed the first clocks, the father of the field, didn't think that they were changeable. It was during our study, we were underway that the first 2 papers came out, the vitamin D study showing repletion in the face of deficiency in obese African Americans reversed or slowed biological age. So in that D deficient population, and then the TRIM study. And both of them were small trials, especially the TRIM. The TRIM was only 9 men, but they reversed biological age in all the clocks, and Horvath was an author, was the final author on that paper. He did all their calculations. And I remember being in our study as those 2 papers came out, just blown away, that biological age was something that was changeable, that was influential. And of course, now, many years later, of course we can influence biological age, of course. But at the time, it wasn't thought possible. So anyway, that was our first investigation. So we had the Illumina epic array. We had a lot of of epigenetic data, a lot of DNA methylation data, and so we took a look at the clocks, and it was very, 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 very exciting to see that we had changed in 8 weeks' time in the first randomized control study using a diet and lifestyle intervention. That our control group had, excuse me, that our uh, study cohort had gotten biologically younger by over 3 years as compared to the control. And then the within group was just over 2 years. It was, yeah, it was, it was pretty extraordinary. I mean, it was a really just huge, huge moment for us, just to be able to design and get to contribute new science. And it just seemed to be born out of, the my prior experiences just kind of fit into where I came from, and having a team, having a really smart team around me, allowing all of us to ask the big questions and think the big thoughts and design something, build something, being kind of cavalier, having some faith, or maybe having a lot of faith.
It's Kara, I mean, to really congratulate you on your journey in so many ways because you have been a first in many respects. And the way that you have created and used that diversification of thinking and teams and different thought systems. I mean, you were doing journal club and then you had your podcast where people weren't really talking about things like you were, right? And then came longevity. And now we sit in 2026. Longevity is one of the biggest things. And you've already done the science, and you did the science and then had the book. And I just feel like you have primed so much. You primed this path for all the people around you, for yourself, and for all of the people that you've helped as patients. So I'm just wondering at this time of your life where you're in your 50s. You've done a lot. You've achieved a lot. You have a spiritual underbelly from your 20s. So, looking forward and kind of visioning out, what do you see for yourself in that respect? Because you have come so far. So, where is there to go? Or do you feel like you're going to sit in the zen of all of this? Do you have a certain trajectory, or do you even think about it in that way?
So things that I'm thinking about currently are really honoring and putting in front the community that we are. Like, I'm so huge on community. I mean, you will rarely hear me say, I feel I did X or Y or Z. It's just, there are, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I also just, I support the human beings around me. I want to hear from them. I want to hear what they have to say. I want to, just be present to their own brilliance that they will bring forward. I mean, we all have a role to play. We all have a job to do. We're all, contributing our best. And I think kind of providing room for that with my team and with our greater community, in our webinar platform, and we're going to do another masterclass this year, and we had people from 110 different countries, and there's just this wildly active chat, and I love it. I just love dialoguing with people in our space because they're so freaking interesting and thinkers and big-hearted and wanting to do right in the universe. I mean, there's just so much right in our world, and I wanna foster that, bring it forward, um, and continue to allow and just, you know, I just that really, really makes me happy. So there's that going on. We're thinking about in the scientific realm, getting funding for now moving into looking at exposomic aging versus programmatic aging, and can we influence that with our intervention? So that's kind of a nice juicy new area that I'm excited about moving into. And I'm back in bike racing. You're like I'm
See a lot of
competing.
your reels on social media,
Isn't
like
that
you with
funny?
the
There's
close
like
up
that's the
and you're
only
biking, you're with your daughter, and it seems like,
yeah.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
living a
I love
great life in that way, right? You have that work-life balance, it seems, on the outside.
Yeah, I might have too much life versus work. First, I mean, not that I know people will push back on it, but I was like, work has been extremely juicy and satisfying, and rewarding to me. But yeah, now with my daughter, with my little human, and with my community here in Mexico, our awesome cycling community, and just, yeah, sort of going back to competing again, and I just love it. It feels very it's an interesting interpretation of meditation, but we go out very early when it's dark and it's the desert here, and the stars are massive and bright, and it's just so cool. It's amazing. It's delicious and inspiring and kind of frees me. Um so I mean, that's where I am. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things going on, and I am bullish on making space for, others,
That's what I'm hearing.
allowing.
Yeah, the mentorship, it's, the legacy, the next generation, really tending to that, and I really that's so beautiful to hear. Well, in our final moment, I guess, anything that you would want to leave us with as it relates to science and spirituality that you feel may inspire other generations or just even for yourself?
I mean, I think there's something about really allowing yourself to be open. I've been somebody who's always got a whiteboard or, a large pad of paper. Um, I guess you can use notes. I have notes on my phone, whatever medium works. um Capturing that information, capturing those thoughts. They might seem disparate, but I think those inspirational nuggets that can come to us, we need to capture those and respect them and know that they'll come back. I have piles of little sticky notes and stuff where I capture things like that. And working with my team, we do that. We capture a lot, and it comes back and it informs us, like a lot of what I talked about here. I dialogued with my team on, and we have some Fathom notes, because we were talking about the podcast and spirituality and science, and I and then it was in that conversation with my team, just kind of recollecting some of the things that I've shared with you today. Being in the Zen center, and all of, and God is in the mechanism, and Richard Lord teaching me to read the boring the Boehringer Mannheim chart, and just cool stuff like that. Just it's like allowing something bigger than myself to exist and inform my thinking and inform my decision making. Also also trusting that, you know,
Yeah.
I would hand that to people. I mean, the thing is, I said this once when Jeff gave me in 2018, he gave me the Emerging Leadership Award at at PLMI, and it was a ridiculous honor. It was very unexpected. It was so unexpected that I think I was actually in my pajamas in bed, and Brent Eck was like, "Hey, Carrie, you better get back down here." He's like, "You better get your clothes on, get back down here." And Jeff was a very early believer in my work in epigenetic, like hardcore. He
Mhm.
was a big time believer in what we were doing
Yes.
and super, 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 super supported us, which we needed. I mean, I needed to lean on him a lot because I knew it was way out of the box. But to just have his steadfast belief, and it was manifested certainly in a beautiful way, and that such unexpected, but so honored to receive that award. And I was up there, and I was just like, just it hit me. I just say, that this is an all hands on deck moment, and we all have something to offer in this journey. And what my offering looks like is different than what your offering looks like. We all have, it's all hands. If we are going to, achieve the mission of really changing the trajectory of not just healthcare, but really humanity, it's all hands on deck. And we really need to live with full intention and allow ourselves to blossom and to be that big human that we're all capable of. But again, it's important that we respect sort of my color is a different color. Like, and all of this is allowed because there's this exquisite symmetry that's really beyond what we're capable even of seeing at this point. But that's not exactly what I said. But I said something about that, and it was amazing because David Perlmutter came up to me after, and he said, "Gosh, Kara, now I know why I came to this conference. I came to hear what you had to say, which is so beautiful and moving for me." But I without question believe that with every fiber of my being. And to allow someone else to expand, to give them that opportunity to have that space and to witness them in what it is that they do is so juicy and rewarding. So that's what I would probably end with.
Love it. This has been beyond inspirational. I have even taken notes on my little sticky pad here.
That's awesome.
Thank you for letting me share space with you. Thank you for being a source of so many inspiring ways of thinking. And I'm sure that whoever's listening to this has already, the neurons are firing and the inspiration is carried forward. So thank you so much, Kara. This was really a delight. And all these interviews, again, they're teaching me. I feel and what you're imparting here is this energy, the energy of your life and how you've expanded through it. And I can feel it. So thanks again for being on.